Hi, everyone. Breaking news this evening. Donald Trump has filed an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court in connection with the Mar-a-Lago documents case. He's hoping to overturn part of an appeals court ruling which took the 100 or so classified documents retrieved at Mar-a-Lago out of the hands of the special master, Judge Raymond Dearie, who's been reviewing all the other 11,000 or so documents seized. Now, remember, Trump appointed federal judge Aileen Cannon in Florida had initially blocked the Department of Justice from continuing its review of the classified documents as part of its criminal investigation. But that decision was overturned by a panel of majority Trump-appointed judges on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals last month, which allowed the FBI access to the documents again. And while Team Trump does not seem to be asking for the classified documents to be taken away from the FBI, they do seem to want the special master to get them so he can make a determination about what was classified at all, which could further delay the investigation. The Trump team claiming that the appeals court didn't have the power to do what they did. The 11th Circuit overstepped when it stopped Special Master Dearie from reviewing the documents. It's a special master who has not turned out to be particularly favorable to Team Trump. So I'm not exactly clear on what they're trying to do here. Justice Clarence Thomas, who's responsible for any appeals from the 11th Circuit, has now given the DOJ until Tuesday to respond. So what exactly is going on here? Joining me now is David Frederick, an appellate attorney who has argued dozens of cases in front of the United States Supreme Court. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. All right, so what is your interpretation of what the Trump team is doing here by going to the Supreme Court on what seems like a pretty limited issue?
It does seem like a limited issue, and the strategy is not clear from the face of the filing itself. What I infer are two purposes behind what the former president's lawyers are seeking to do. One is simply to delay the Department of Justice from being able to complete its review, its classified review, and its potential for bringing an indictment for the misuse of classified materials. But the second purpose, which is not clear from the filing, but what I infer is that they're seeking to get a sneak peek, if you will, at what those classified documents are so that they can formulate a defense or they can try to pre-butt, if you will, a potential indictment. Right now, it's not clear that the former president's lawyers know exactly what's in these classified documents. And I think that one purpose behind this Supreme Court filing is the hope that if they get the special master to have access to those documents, they'll get some window into what is contained in them.
I think most people are going to say, wait a sec, these were documents that were at his house, and you're saying he doesn't know what they are?
I think that's right. I think the lawyers that are currently on the case were not the ones who were inventorying them or reviewing them. In fact, you'll recall that they made several representations in the past that they had returned all the classified documents. That appears not to have been true. And so I think that one of the gambits here is to try to get a better idea of what's in these documents so that they have a better way of mounting a potential defense.
Do you think the court's going to step in here? Would you expect it? I mean, you have a lot of experience in the Supreme Court. Do you expect this court to step in?
To me, it feels like a Hail Mary. I'd be surprised if Justice Thomas, even after reviewing the Department of Justice's submission, grants a stay. The full court eventually can be brought in under the Supreme Court rules to decide whether or not to continue the stay. I'd be surprised if the court does this. It feels not like an issue that
I agree with you. I do not expect that the court will step in on behalf of Donald Trump, and I'll be talking about an issue related to this later in the program about the fact that people have this misapprehension, I think, about the Supreme Court, that all issues are decided based on political party. David Frederick, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.